Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Today we've got Andy Davies, who's going to be giving us a presentation about digital sustainability. Once the presentation's finished, we'll come back with questions, and then we'll see what else we need to learn or how we feel about taking some of this advice on board. So thank you very much for joining us, Andy. Would you like to start your presentation or say a few words to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the invite. Delighted to be here and discussing the topic with you. And thank you for the slight hiccup with the recording. That takes some of the pressure off me as I try and share my screen and as the invited technical expert, do something technical online. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Can everyone see that? Excellent. Thumbs up. Thank you, Bernie. And I'm going to see if I can get my presentation view up there. I can see my notes. Right. Okay. So hurdle one is cleared. So yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about digital sustainability. Um, it's something that I didn't always know about. It's not been my main focus. I've worn many hats, as some of the more follically challenged members of the call today will understand. You have to wear many hats when you're in our position, and sometimes you professionally have to wear many hats as well. So, to give you an introduction. So I'm Andy, as Anna said. I'm a sustainability-focused freelance web professional, and I work with an agency called Whole Grain Digital, who are a B Corp WordPress agency in the UK in London. They've been at the forefront of digital sustainability since they became a B Corp in 2017, and I've been working with them for 3 years now on various sort of elements of digital sustainability. But that hasn't always been my focus. And I think to sort of introduce the topic, it's worth sort of going through my journey and how I came to be talking to you today, effectively. So I'm going to start off with a question just to sort of get a flavour of the room. If you can give me a thumbs up or a hands up or anything like whatever you can do on Zoom as to who's ever thought about the environmental impact of the internet as they've been using it from day to day. Okay, so a few thumbs up there. So we have got people who've thought about this in the past. And then a follow-up question, has anybody ever taken any steps to actively try and reduce that impact? Okay, so yeah, a few hand waves, but not so many. And don't worry if you sort of thought about it, but you haven't taken steps. It's definitely something that you're not alone in. I hadn't thought about what digital sustainability was or how to take actions against it until fairly recently. And I'm going to take you back to 2009, which is kind of where when I think about my journey and my sort of sustainability story, that's where it all started. And in 2009, my wife Heather, who will be giving a presentation in a few weeks' time, so I'm going to steal some of her thunder here. We moved to the French Alps. We came here to run a small chalet business and escape from the rat race. And it might sound like a humble brag, but I promise you it isn't. It's really important to the sort of story that I'm going to tell you today. It plays a really important role. Like one of the things that it really taught me moving here was how to code websites. We run our own business, as I'm sure you know. We've got a lot of small business owners and freelancers on the call today. Doing things yourself, like learning to do things sort of in-house to save money and sort of maintain that expertise yourself. I'm sure it's something that you can really appreciate. So I taught myself the fundamentals of HTML, of CSS, of SEO, of website performance, and went through a number of sort of iterations of the business website to try and keep us competitive and keep us sort of as lean and as profitable and as sort of lightweight and internal as possible. But probably more important to the sustainability side, being here in the mountains, like it gave me a connection to nature and climate that I hadn't had since I was a teenager, going hiking with scouts and sort of being out and playing out and collecting conkers and doing all those things that you do when you're a kid. Like there's something about working in an office and sort of being in your early 20s that can often sort of take you away from that connection. And it's really seasonal here. It seems like a daft thing to say, but there are four sort of distinct seasons in the Alps. And the longer we were here, we've been here for 16 years now, and the longer we've been here, the more that we've noticed that those sort of seasons are changing, and you know what was going on in 2009 isn't what we see in 2025. And what we know now is that the Alps are warming twice as fast as the rest of Europe. So that means that what it often means is it's warmer and wetter in the winter, which is important if you if you're relying on sort of snowfall and cold weather. But it's also hotter and drier in the summer. So you'll see a small picture there, perhaps of a forest fire that happened a couple of years ago. Which, when we talk to the locals who've been here for generations, it's something that's almost unheard of to have sort of a self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating sort of forest fire within the area. It's just not something that the ecosystem would sort of normally allow. It's too wet and warm. Like it's not like sort of like you see in Southern Europe or North America. So what this sort of connection prompted myself and Heather to do, I'm sure she'll say this in a few weeks' time, is that it changed the way we lived. We became more sustainable in our personal lives, and how we consume, how we travel is really different now to when we first arrived. And as we were making those changes in our personal lives, I started to question what my professional life looked like. At this stage, we'd sold the business and I'd become a freelance web designer. And the the question of how are you a sustainable focused web designer wasn't really anything that I'd ever thought about, and sort of left me with some questions. One of which was, what the heck is a sustainable website? Which kind of brings us into some of the focus of the talk today. So one of the first things I found when I asked that question, I don't think that was the exact search term that I put in, but it probably wasn't that much different. I found something called a website carbon calculator. And that was something that Wholegrain created as they were going through their B Corp certification, to try and help visualize that websites have a carbon footprint. And from there, I fell down a sustainability rabbit hole, a digital sustainability rabbit hole. And I ended up exploring lots of different resources online, including the Sustainable Web Design website. I signed the Sustainable Web Manifesto, and I started learning more about the industry in general, but Wholegrain in particular. They worked with business declares to build something called a digital declutter toolkit, which is something that I think will come up in conversation a bit later on. And their founder, Tom Greenwood, literally wrote the book on sustainable web design. It's something that not many people can say, but it's quite a brag if you manage to be able to do it. So as I was bouncing around that rabbit hole, what did I learn? Well, I learned about where the internet sits. I'm going to give you a nice blank page, where the internet sits in a global context. The Internet of Things, so basically everything that's connected online, the best estimates that researchers found thinks that it accounts for about 1.32% of global emissions and up to 12% of global electricity use, depending on how it's measured. So emissions-wise, that 1.32% doesn't sound like much, but it's more than international aviation. That's aviation where flights take off from one place and land in a different country. And I think it's fair to say that everybody on the call will at some point have heard people talking about how you should fly less for environmental reasons, how that's a way of reducing your environmental impact. But very little is talked about on our browsing habits. The example I've got here is the Jeff Bezos wedding. A lot of the coverage talks about 90 private jets flying in and out of Venice to go and celebrate that incredibly important event. But very few people talked about the Instagram posts that were posted up, which is maybe something that Anna's posted on LinkedIn today. I'm not sure, I haven't read the post, but we don't often think about it in those terms, in those sort of digital terms. To give it a little bit more context, if the internet was a country, and try not to think about what the internet as a country might look like or act like, it's quite a terrifying prospect. But it would be about the 13th largest producer in global terms. So it's behind the sort of the largest culprits, China, US, and India, but it sits between Mexico and Brazil in terms of like global emissions. Which kind of leads to the question, well, why is the internet so high in those global pollution rankings? And this is one of the things that's become more and more clear as I've worked longer in the industry in the area. It's that digital is physical. So much of what we talk about when we talk about being online is unphysical sort of wording, like the cloud, wireless, Wi-Fi. All of those things suggest that it's quite an intangible thing when we're online, when we're looking at websites, when we're posting, when we're interacting in a digital way. But in actual fact, the internet is made up of a lot of physical infrastructure. And it kind of starts with data centers. That's where all of the information online is stored. In many ways, they're the backbone of the internet. And they're around in ever increasing numbers. And that's kind of due to the twin gold rushes of AI and data analysis and data capture. And the thing about data centers is that they need a lot of land, a lot of water, and a lot of natural resources to run. And they also need a lot of electricity to be powered and cooled 24/7 so that we can check whatever recipes we need in the middle of the night so that we can watch YouTube, so we can be on Netflix. Like, the internet needs to be available 24/7, so it needs to be powered 24/7 as well. And then the thing that connects the data centers to our devices, what we're watching on today, is a transmission network. So a transmission network is something that you maybe see more regularly than a data center, but it's not always entirely obvious. It's made up of things like 5G towers. It's made up of an awful lot of undersea cables. There are about 2 million undersea cables that allow the globe to be connected to the internet, and satellites as well. There are 4,700 satellites in the Starlink network, for instance. And if you've ever been out, for instance, taking your dog out for a pee in the middle of the night, you might have seen a line of satellites or a line of lights scrolling across the sky. First time I saw it, I thought maybe we were being invaded by aliens. It turns out it was worse. It was Elon Musk at work. Again, all of these elements require power, resources, and in the case of Starlink, rocket ships to make them work. There's a huge sort of carbon and resource requirement to do that. So yeah, as I say, the sort of the submarine cables will stretch from the Earth to the moon a number of times, and I'm going to scroll through that because I've lost my train of thought, and I'm back. Devices. So the final sort of piece of the chain in here is devices. So all of the elements that we talked about, the data centers and the transmission network, they allow us to have connected devices from phones to laptops to fridges. The energy used by end devices makes up about 54% of the energy consumed within the system. So it's in many ways the sort of major part of it. So the network is the same as data centers. The network requires power 24/7, 365 to give us access to online data, and everything that's online is data. Like, that's quite an important thing to think. So to put it in really simple terms, all of this infrastructure from data centers to devices facilitates the movement of data. Data storage and data transfer is what makes the internet work. And the way that currently sort of digital sustainability is benchmarked and measured is using data as a proxy. So the way that we think about it in website terms, but basically in any sort of digital sustainability terms, is that data equals energy, and that energy has a CO2 cost. That's quite a simplified view, and it's a view that is currently being chipped away at and improved sort of within various think tanks and committees and organizations throughout the world. But that's kind of where we are at the moment. It's a simple proxy. It's not a perfect one, but it is the best we've got. Why should you care? that digital activities has a sort of carbon cost and environmental cost. It's something that I think is a theme of some of the conversations that Anne had in the sort of the preparation for this. Well, from a sustainability point of view, from a sort of human nature and being good stewards for the planet point of view, I think we all have an imperative to minimize the carbon output we have control of, including online. That might mean balancing what we do and how we do it, but I think to a greater or lesser extent, it is imperative, it's a moral imperative on everyone to do that. And a big reason for that is because nature is the sort of everything that from which everything else grows, and that includes the internet. All of the infrastructure that I've just discussed requires resources, including metals, rare earth minerals, water for cooling, land use for data centers, and there are limited resources on Earth, and how we choose to use them, I think, is an important question. It's probably the question of our times. There's competition on who gets those resources and how they're used. One of the things that's not often discussed is that digital and technological infrastructure is sort of in competition with decarbonisation infrastructure for rare earth minerals and for funding. The more data centres that you see being built might mean less solar panels and less windmills. And if you pay close attention to the news at the moment, you will see a different tone possibly from certain governments about the requirement for digital infrastructure versus the requirement for maybe offshore wind, for solar panels, for battery, for battery storage, for that sort of thing. They seem to be treated in a slightly different way from planning, which is a larger question than maybe we're going to get onto now, but it definitely is part of the picture. Which sort of brings us on to what we can all do to do that. There's quite a lot you can do, but there are also some really simple steps. And I think, like anything in sustainability, taking sort of some small, simple steps is a really good way of starting off a journey. So I'd encourage you to start small too. In terms of practical steps, the first one is actually really simple. And I'll do a quick show of hands and ask how many people are using Chrome to sort of engage with this today, or how many people have used Chrome on their as part of their sort of browsing habits this morning. So statistically speaking, there should be about 68 to 70% of you who've used Chrome to sort of browse online today. And one of the things that I've been sort of pushing for, and has proved slightly controversial when I've discussed it, is that if you have a more private browsing experience, that is a more sustainable experience. And that's because the amount of data that's collected as you browse has an impact on the amount of energy, on the amount of carbon, on the amount of sort of infrastructure that's required to be online. Google collects a huge amount of data from their users across all platforms, not just Chrome, but Chrome's a really important part of the puzzle. All that data is stored and analyzed in data centers and is used to power, I think I would argue anyway, overconsumption through their very targeted and effective advertising technology. And you can reduce that without without changing your habits almost, other than changing your browser, by using something like Firefox or Brave to do browsing. That way there's less data collected through your day-to-day sort of online experience. Practically speaking, it doesn't make very much difference unless you're a web developer. You definitely need to use Chrome to do the testing and sort of go with the majority there. But for most people, switching from Firefox to Chrome, switching the other way around, switching from Chrome to Firefox is not going to make a material difference to how they're browsing online. You can go a little bit further than that as well and look at something like DuckDuckGo for your searching, again, where there's less data being stored and sort of analyzed from that. And you could use something like Proton Mail instead of Gmail. That starts to take you down a more complicated route. It's very difficult to entirely de-Googlify yourself, but sort of taking that first step and changing your browser I think, is a really important way of reducing the amount of data transfer and all of the sort of implications of that as your online activities continue. Tip two is try and take control of your website missions. And that's where I started. It's sort of, what I quite often do day to day, and sort of becomes a little bit more data, involves a little bit more sort of data analysis to do it. So what gets measured gets managed. There's a few easy ways to check sort of how much carbon's being emitted by your website. But the obvious one is to go to the website carbon calculator, put in your homepage and see what the score is. You'll be able to see whether it runs on renewables or not. Using renewably powered hosting is another sort of really simple way of reducing the amount of digital emissions that are associated with your business running or what you're doing day to day. If it doesn't run on renewables, ask yourself why not. Can you change to a sustainable hosting provider? And if you're tied to a provider, so Squarespace and Wix in particular, we often find that particularly sort of solopreneurs and freelancers, they've got a simple website. It's normally done on a website builder. Well, if they're not running on sustainables, like, can you use your pounds, your euros, your dollars to lobby them to do better? If you're not happy with the score, there's loads of resources around to help you do small and large things, technical and non-technical, to make your website more efficient, more energy efficient, more user-friendly, and lower carbon. The Web Sustainability Guidelines is a really good free resource that helps you do it. It can be quite technical, depending on what you need to do to sort of make the most improvements. So finding a friendly web developer, online, on LinkedIn, on Slack, there's loads of forums where you can ask questions, and you'll find, as with a lot of sustainability, there's a lot of friendly people out there who are just willing to, help people along the way. I'm going to finish with a third tip, which again sort of gets into that thing of everybody can make a small change, but a meaningful change online, and that's your email habits. Email is one of those things that, certainly from my point of view, I got an email address when I was 18, when I went to university. I'm 45 now, and I dread to think how many emails I've sent, saved, stored, deleted in the meantime. And the sort of analogy that I make is that if you think about your inbox at the moment and you consider all of those emails as being a physical piece of mail rather than a digital one, a postcard, a letter, a bill, or whatever it is, how many rooms in your house or where you live would you need to store those letters? And it gets back to that idea of digital being physical. Like, if you think about your emails, they're all being stored somewhere. They're probably being stored in multiple places if you're on one of the larger sort of email providers, backed up multiply. So think about that. Like, if you think about whether you need to send emails, whether you can avoid unnecessary emails, whether you can sort of break an email chain and stop forwarding large images or large sort of chains, and restart a thing and send it to only the people who actually need to see it. I think one of the things that I see quite regularly is large attachments being sent to me as a web designer. I quite often get an email with an image to go on a web page, and if I don't delete that image out of the inbox, then it sits there and is stored for ages, and it takes up a small but meaningful sort of amount of storage on a server somewhere. And individually, that might not make much of a difference, but when you compound that with the number of people who are online, the number of emails that are sent, it starts to become a really big issue. So linking to files from the cloud rather than attaching them, or using a service like, I was going to say WeTransfer, but I think I might have fallen out with them. Smash, I think, is the one that I've moved on to, where it's an individual link and the file is saved for 7 days and then deleted. Is a more sort of sustainable option to do that. And then finally, having a bit of a spring clean. You can go email zero by just deleting everything out of your inbox if you're feeling really brave, but you can be more conscious of it than that. If you don't read the newsletters you subscribe to, stop them being sent. There's a small energy cost, a small carbon cost for every email that hits your inbox, whether you're reading it or not. So if you're regularly getting stuff that you don't read, delete it. It kind of comes down to being conscious and aware of what's happening sort of in your digital life. And I'm going to stop talking now because I've been rattling on long enough. And I'm really only scratching the surface here. So I'm interested to hear what questions people have got, what topics people might want to discuss. I've sort of given you a few simple steps that I think everyone can take. There are larger and smaller steps than that to sort of lower your digital carbon footprint. But I think any steps that you take as a result of me talking today, and I hope that there will be some, they're going to be a gateway to a larger set of actions in the same way that any sustainability action is. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to have a quick drink, and I'm going to, I think, open up to questions, Anne.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy.